Welcome to Behind the Tools. Here's Tradify CEO and your host, Michael Steckler.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Behind the Tools from Tradify with me, Michael from Tradify. Great this week to have Chris Collins from Grizlec, who's based in Melbourne, Australia. For those that don't know Melbourne, it's a very pleasant city, cultural capital of Australia. Great weather, fantastic coffee. And I do believe, and you're still able to get a fantastic coffee right now, unfortunately have been in and out of lockdowns throughout the year in that part of the world. But Chris, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board. Chris, maybe just to start, do you want to maybe give everyone a brief background about your business and what you do, where you mainly focus?
Look, I do a lot of domestic, a lot of renovations. Sorry, I am an electrician. Focused mainly in the domestic sort of sector.
Okay.
Do a little bit of data with another guy who's sort of in the voice networks sort of
Right.
area, helping him with, he's really good on the tech side and I'm a lot better on the cabling side, so it works well together. So
Cool, fantastic. And you've been in business for a while. How did you into being an electrician originally?
Originally, I was working for a bigger tool company and asked for a pay rise. And the boss told me there was no money at the moment. And I'd sort of worked my way up and been given that story a few times. So I went home that night and signed myself up for a pre-apprenticeship and went in the next day and resigned. So that was it. One of my good friends gave me a bit of a head start. Just went out with him and started working with him.
Yeah, fantastic.
That's where it all started. And then worked my way into an apprenticeship from there.
Yeah. And is that what you always wanted to do? How did you fall into the trade?
Well, it was more speaking to the friend who gave me a start. I sort of thought about going into being a mechanic or something like that because I've always had an interest in cars. And his advice was, don't make your hobby your job. And he said, come out and work with me.
And you've had quite a rest is history, yeah. And you've had quite a varied background, right? You've done a lot of work, different type of electrical work. Do you want to maybe talk to some of that? I mean, I think I'd written down in my notes that you even worked on traffic lights at one point in time. Yeah,
so I started my apprenticeship that I got was with a company that did a lot of refrigeration, wiring. So we wouldn't actually do the pipe work, but we would go in. We did a hell of a lot of supermarkets, sort of our bread and butter. So we'd build the switchboards from the ground up.
Yeah.
And then, wire the supermarkets. Did that for probably nearly 10 years. Needed a change. And one of my good friends who I got a job working in refrigeration was working in traffic signals at the time. So I jumped ship and went and worked on traffic signals. So that was interesting, something different.
Yeah, quite different to refrigeration.
Look, I mean, the background I got in refrigeration, being a lot of control wiring, gave me a really good background to start in traffic signals, being that, lots of wires and not just power to it.
Fantastic. And you talked at the start that most of your work is now residential. What do you find the biggest differences between doing residential and, I guess, originally when you were doing supermarkets, you were doing more commercial work? How do you feel about the difference between the two? Do you have a preference?
Yeah, look, I really did enjoy the commercial side. I'd say you get a lot dirtier doing residential.
Right.
Crawling under houses, crawling through roofs. But I guess the difference is I'm doing all that for myself rather than working for a boss. So that's the trade-off.
And when did that happen? What made you decide to go kind of self-employed and move away from working, setting up your own thing?
Look, the company I was working for, we had a few differences of opinion on how things were. So I decided to move on. Right. And at the time, it was there was enough work around that basically the talk between me and my wife was, if we start off and if I can keep the work coming in and the business productive and not costing us money, then and we had a figure that if it got to the point where we delved into our savings by so much that we needed to change something, then look at whether I continue, whether I get a job, and haven't really looked back from there.
That's really cool. So that's interesting that you put that. I mean, I often talk to guests about they either have a number in their head in terms of what they want their turnover to be over a period of time. But it's interesting that yours was, you wanted to go into on your own, but just make sure that you didn't have to dip into savings as long as you had enough income that meant that you could self-sustain the business. That was enough to keep going.
The way we thought it through, the whole point of me starting a business was so that I could be at home and be a dad, be a little bit more flexible in my hours, and create the business around a work-life balance.
Yeah.
And that's why it wouldn't normally be call it a productive business goal to survive.
Right.
But the whole point of the business was to create that family life. So I've got 2 young girls. One's 10 months and one will be 3 on Friday. So we started the business right when we started having kids. At that point, it was a productive business goal, so to speak.
Right.
Because it has enabled me to make those decisions that has meant I can spend a bit more time at home and enjoy it.
It's really great that's worked out for you. So because often I'll speak to people and they'll say the ambition was some form of work-life balance. Actually, there was I spoke to someone a while back who talks about doing a 4-day week. So you've managed to realise that, you managed to be able to make enough that you can still spend a bit more time at home and spend time with the kids. Yeah,
look, it's always going to be a battle, and now's when we're going to look at moving the business forward, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's been a very steep learning curve over the last sort of 4 years, and now that's why I've got on to Tradify, is to take down the paperwork, focus more on what work I've got, keep it a little bit more streamlined, and build the business up.
And so your intention is to grow the business, make it bigger, maybe hire people in the future. Is that part of the sort of medium to longer term plan?
Yeah, longer term, I don't think I want to build a massive company.
Yeah.
I like the idea of keeping it personal, keeping it small, manageable. I've supervised previously, and I've seen a lot of companies where once they have a lot of blokes, it becomes very, I guess, money driven, which, I'd prefer to keep it a little bit more personal, look after the guys if I employ.
And do you, sort of a question around, when you started, you came out of commercial work, how did you sort of get your first customer? Or did you already have that via introduction? How did that all start?
Being a Sparky, I've been doing a little bit around the place for a little while. Where I live is basically the community I grew up in. Yeah. So I know a lot of people. Word of mouth's a big thing for me. And built it up from there, and then obviously through networking and relationships, built up a good customer base, and it's moved on from there, which has been really good.
Yeah, and when you say networking, what does that look like for you?
I guess it's all about, for me, it's more about relationships. It's probably something that I've got to look into developing more professionally, but it is about relationships and who you speak to, how you speak to them, looking at the opportunities and reading into what people are actually looking for, and finding the opportunities there.
I was just going to say, I presume a lot of your kind of historical work people have also been pretty good at passing on as you mentioned, word of mouth, sort of recommending you for work in other places.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, at the moment, it's nearly all word of mouth is where my business comes from. So,
and when you sort of set the business up, what's been the biggest? I mean, clearly there's been a lockdown and everything's been going on in the last sort of however long it is, year or so. Apart from that, what's been the biggest challenge, do you think, from versus what you expected once you set yourself up on your own?
The challenge for me has been paperwork, is finding the time, pricing. Finding that balance. The paperwork side of it's really something that I wouldn't say battled with, but it's probably
you're not alone.
Yeah, trying to stay on top of it, but also spend enough time with the family and meet those goals of why I did this. Yeah, up until recently, it's I've had a few different methods for a few different things, sort of information everywhere, and like I say, now I'm sort of trying to focus a bit more and bring everything into one spot, and it seems to be working for me. So,
what prompted that? Was that just the level of time, the amount of time you were spending just on paperwork? You decided one day just to sort of sit down and figure out the best way to solve that?
Yeah. So, being in lockdown, it was sort of, we looked at it as being that a lot of my work's domestic. A lot of that's I'm either not allowed to do the work I've got, because of the lockdown, or a lot of the work has slowed down. So my thought was, if I can't be out working, might as well take this time, streamline what I am doing, and hopefully come out the other side of lockdown firing.
Yeah, that was the one thing I did hear. A lot of tradies seems to take that approach, to use that time to sort of rethink how they ran their business, and it sounds like you did the same thing, which is good to see. And you talked about pricing. I'm interested in how you approach that. So I guess once you set up and you talk about your charge out rate, or in general how you sort of thought about charging customers, how did you solve for that, and any sort of experiences that you learned from changing things?
I sat down, figured out what my average cost was going to be, or what I guessed my cost to be. Basically figured out what I needed to make to live, and figured out my charge out rate there. And then a lot of the jobs I do is cost plus materials, so that makes it reasonably simple to invoice. I had a bad experience when I say cost plus materials. I learned sort of early on that cheaper materials weren't as good. With some cheaper stuff costing me money, with going back and having to replace them. And ever since then, I've stuck with brands that I know and trust, that'll back me. And that's also helped with the costing, so to speak, because I learnt that there has to be that cost built into what I charge something out at, because unfortunately in this day and age, there is failures in gear. It's not necessarily like it's just something that we deal with these days, unfortunately. But build a little bit into the gear, and use quality gear. And after about the first 6-9 months, I learnt that cheaper gear isn't necessarily going to make me more profitable.
Right.
It was quite the opposite.
Yeah, because you can go back
in terms of charge out. Yeah, it looked like I was going backwards in my charge out, but it was actually making me more profitable by using more expensive gear.
Yeah.
When I first started, one of the big things I thought people would want is a cheap price. But after being in business for a little while, I learnt that price sort of comes, call it second to a lot of people. They want something installed once, it done well, and they're happy to pay for that, as opposed to having something that's substandard installed in the first place.
Yeah, it's 100% true. And actually, the ones that are generally looking for a very cheap option aren't always your best customers anyway, in terms of fit, is what I hear from most people.
I've learned that as well. There's I do pick up a little bit of work through Facebook, and I've learned that sort of losing time on certain quotes and things like that. Generally, the ones that mention cost when they're looking for a tradesman are usually going to shop around. I did have one customer that, when I went out to quote, told me she'd contacted 9 electricians to quote on the job. And it was not worth my time.
Not worth the time of quoting even, It's good advice, especially for people who are looking to start out, but trying to figure out who the right customer is and understanding some of those warning signs. Some people take the work because it's you want to get your business started and get word of mouth out there, and that can be useful. But there are some common red flags, I think, to spotting the people that really aren't so worried about quality and want the cheapest job they can possibly find.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's not knowing everyone's circumstances. There's like, especially through the last 18 months with lockdown, there has been people that I've worked for that I have helped out in terms of price. So I understand why they were looking for a cheap price, not necessarily shopping around, so to speak, looking for a cheap price because, there's a lot of people out of work, and I'm lucky enough to be able to work.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. Yeah, it's pretty exceptional circumstances in the last year. And do you feel good now? How do you feel about pricing now? Is it something you feel very comfortable in terms of how competitive you are and that you're pricing at the right level?
Look, it's something that I battle with constantly about where I am with pricing. Being competitive. I think a lot of the time, a lot of people would tell me I'm too low compared to where I probably should be. Another thing that I've been looking at recently is potentially whether you call it a business coach, a mentor. It's probably something since starting my own business, a lot of the people that I worked with have either moved out of the industry or not particularly in the same market, so to speak. So having that network to bounce things off is something that I've sort of lost, which is why I've been thinking about either, some sort of coaching or mentor to help me move forward at a profitable level. It's going to be very different, me making a profit for myself and building up, having blokes on the books. There's no option then. It's got to be profitable.
It's it seems to be a common path for people setting up to lean on either a business network or a business coach, and it seems to be for most people I've spoken to seem to highly recommend it. I think if you get a good person, they really help think through things like what's your charge out rate, how do you do that type of stuff. So it seems like a good time to be thinking about that. And then working in Melbourne and around Melbourne, there's all sorts of wildlife in Australia. I know you have some funny stories around that. Do you maybe want to share one of your sort of the stuff you come across with animals in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I had a fault reasonably close to home. A circuit that was tripping an RCD, so a safety switch. It was a bit of an elusive fault. So I was there, tested the circuit, and it was down to earth. And then I'd go to a different room, the fault was gone. And I was starting to break down the circuit and trying to isolate the fault. The fault would just disappear and then it'd come back. Ended up after about 3 hours of chasing this fault, and I could have my meter on the cable and it would show the fault. 5 seconds later, the fault would disappear and then it'd come back. It was that quickly coming and disappearing, and I'd never seen anything like it. It turned out that a possum had crawled down inside the wall, chewed the cables, and as he was moving, he was shorting the cables.
How'd you get rid of him?
On and off, basically. So we called a pest guy, and he put a trap in the roof with some bait that I think they said he used apples. It was some sort of fruit, which apparently possums love.
Yeah.
Possum actually crawled itself up out of the wall. It was a brick cavity wall. It got itself out of the wall, back up into the roof, and they released him. I went back and repaired all the cable and reinstated the circuit. So bit of a random one. I'll probably never see that one again in my career.
I was about to say, you've only seen that once, presumably that's the only time.
See a lot of chewed wires. It was an interesting thing pulling the power point off, and the claw of the possum actually sitting on the back of the power point, coming out with the power point as I pulled it out.
Oh, wow.
I could send you through the picture later if you.
Yeah. That's funny. Wow, doesn't happen very often. And then you're 4 years in. Sounds like it's going well in amongst everything else that's happening in the world, which is great. Any advice to someone who's maybe listening and thinking about doing the same thing, thinking about going out on their own? Anything you would have done differently, or any advice you give to anyone?
Organisation. So I was using Xero up until now, which was really good to keep the business in order. And it's only since I've started looking at job management that I should have done that a couple of years ago, and it probably would have really simplified things and sped things up. Stopped the. I was holding a lot of info in my head, and to be able to just put it all in one place so that you can sit down, look at one thing. It made things a lot simpler for me. But the organisation is definitely one thing that I think would be a big thing for anyone starting out, and doing it from the get-go really would make it a lot simpler and help.
Which is probably the easiest time to do it when you've got no records and customers yet. And so, yeah, it does. That makes a ton of sense. We always finish the podcast on a sort of handful of questions, which I want to ask you. I think I might know the answer to the first one, but I'm intrigued by your answer. So if you were to be doing another trade, what would it be if you weren't an electrician?
I'd probably like to, I like restoring stuff. I don't know that it's particularly a trade, but it's something that I wouldn't mind doing. Old cars or anything like that, like something around. It's definitely still be something hands-on. Definitely not a plumber.
And then when you're on site, lunch, what's your go-to lunch?
Biscuits with a bit of ham, cheese, tomato on the top, just because it's simple to prepare in the morning.
Yeah,
you just throw the biscuits in your lunchbox, knife with a tomato, bit of cheese already chopped up, easy. And love a chicken and chips on a Friday.
Oh, nice. I have to qualify the biscuits, because there's going to be a few people here. We've got quite a few people from the UK who listen, and the US. When you say a biscuit, do you mean like a biscuit as in like a cookie biscuit, or do you mean a biscuit as in like a scone biscuit?
No, like a dry biscuit. Like
a dry biscuit.
Like a crusket.
I know what you mean. Like a Ribita. I don't know if that's a bread. I know what you mean.
Yes, like a Ribita.
Yes. There you go. Yeah. Got it.
Sorry, I didn't realise that was a. We just call it a dry biscuit.
Biscuit to me is like a digestive, or a thing you stick in your cup of coffee.
Yeah, righto. Yeah, we still call them biscuits.
You call them biscuits. Great. Well, I learned something. Next one is your sort of go-to, your favourite either tool or tool brand or both.
I use Milwaukee. Lucky enough that one of my friends is a product manager there and helped me out with a lot of dedicated tools, so to speak. So specific for the trade. So yeah, but can't fault it.
He's in a good spot. I feel like I'm saying this every week. Milwaukee definitely seems to be leading the pack at the moment in terms of favoured tool amongst traders that we're speaking to. Yeah,
I got a van full of it. So definitely one of my favourites.
And then, hopefully as things do eventually start to open up, what would be your first go-to either sporting or music event you would want to go to?
Well, Bathurst is coming up. So that would have been, which is a, sorry, you're not in Australia, motor race.
No, I know it.
Bathurst. Yeah, so that'd definitely be a big one. I doubt it's going to happen this year. Hopefully next year we can get up there.
Fingers crossed.
Dad's got a couple of old cars as well, so hopefully be travelling up there with the old cars next year. It's anniversary of one of his winning at Bathurst. So.
Oh wow! Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. So the idea is to get there. So hopefully it's all open by then.
Yeah, we got to hope so. Got to be optimistic about that. You got to think so in a year's time. And then, last question. You work with other trades, other people you've worked with in the past. Anyone you think would be interesting for us to speak to next on the show?
Maybe a wholesaler.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the an electrical wholesaler. See, their side of. I'm sure we've got things that we do that irritate them, and it'd be interesting to hear that side of the story.
Yeah, cool. That's a good idea. This has been really, really helpful. How can people get hold of you? So if there's someone who's listening and does want to get hold of you, or it doesn't have to be an end customer, what's the best way to find you?
Our Facebook page at the moment is probably the primary advertising sort of thing we do. And like I say, that's something we've been looking at as well. So potentially setting up on Google as well. So yeah, but through the Facebook page is generally the best way to get us.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, I appreciate you spending the time. I know you're busy, so really appreciate you spending the time to talk to us. This is great, and good luck with everything. I hope you continue to build the business, and look forward to hearing about the coach or the network that you leverage, and see if that helps pay dividends. And really cool. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, and hopefully you get out of lockdown soon and get out and get the coffee.
Yes, let's hope so. Fingers crossed. Great. Well, thanks everyone for listening or watching. Thanks again, Chris. And as always, if you have feedback, comments, suggestions, if you could rate and review on your chosen platform, it would be greatly appreciated. Until next time, we'll see you then. Cheers.